The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge, and welcome to the show, everybody. This is a live call-in show. The number to call is 343-9927, 343-9927, and as you've heard from the promo all week long, we are going to talk tonight about President Trump's idiot tariffs. Anyway, 343-9927, and I apologize to my guests here for bringing in a little bit of scorn there. It's inappropriate, I guess, but anyhow. And speaking of my guests, Lang Baker, well, really, he's really not a guest. He's half of this show. But Lang Baker's in the studio. Lang, glad to have you.
Good to be here, Wayne.
And we have Marissa Mayer.
Mm-hmm.
Good, because I meant to ask you beforehand, and I took a chance. Anyway, but she is, Marissa is a future star here at Baton Rouge Community Radio. So she's sitting in now and going to participate in the debate a little bit, at least, or our discussion. But feel free to give us a call if you have any questions, or if you can answer any of our questions that we may not be able to. Anyway, so our topic, as I said, was the Trump's tariffs. And Lang, you want to kick it off? I first wanted to define what a tariff is and what a sanction. Is there a difference? Do you know? I do. I have it written down in case you're stumped.
Well, tariffs can be sanctions, but sanctions are more than just tariffs. A tariff is a duty or tax imposed on product coming into one country from another country. And sometimes those are used as a sanction against the other country.
Okay.
But there are a lot of other kinds of sanctions that a country imposes against another country or individuals in other countries.
Well, true, yeah. Well, and then those I think are considered sanctions. I think maybe that's what you said. But the official definitions that I got from somewhere is that a tariff is simply a tax or duty to be paid on a particular class of imports or exports. And sanctions are a threatened penalty for disobeying a law or rule. So actually the tariffs that Trump is proposing now on Turkey would be considered sanctions, as I think they are with Iran also, because of their compliance with the nuclear agreement that Trump dropped out of.
Yeah, there are sanctions on Iran. I don't know. I can't answer about tariffs with respect to Iran.
Well, we're preventing trade or threatening people who do business with them with
right. I don't know if there
problems.
are any taxes on transfer as opposed to outright prohibition.
Okay. Well, we're not going to split hairs, but
Well, on that note, I think it's important that we provide a formal definition for what a trade war is and how we know when we're in one.
good point. Well,
You want to take a stab at that?
Well, what I would think would be like, okay, just like the Confederation of the Colonies, what do they call that before the Constitution was ratified? The Confederacy, it's not the Southern thing, but Articles of Confederation, that's right, with their individual states or colonies in an agreement. They had tariffs to generate income for themselves and also to protect their young businesses. And then once the United States were formed, they also had tariffs for, again, income for the government, as well as to protect their, nascent businesses. There you go. I had to find a 50-cent word in there somewhere. But to me, those are economic tariffs. They're economically based, and so they're benign to a certain extent.
Yeah, I would say there are two economic roles being played there. One is to raise revenue, and the other is to protect your local economy and the development of your local economy.
The development is what I would specify.
Development of the local economy.
Because
but it's also raising revenue to run the government is also an economic activity.
Right. Correct.
And that was the primary source, from what I read, for funding the federal government up until the income tax in 1913. So
Right.
that was for quite a while. That was the main source of income for
And
the
it
federal
worked, too.
government.
We managed to invade countries and conduct wars and all kinds of things with just those tariff revenues. But anywho, since we were projecting democracy around the world, I guess it was okay. Well, anyhow, keep me on track. Okay, so a trade war then for me would be the imposition of tariffs as a penalty. As punishment, punitive tariffs, and with China and Trump was upset that they were taking advantage of us. They were requiring businesses to give them some of their business secrets, and also we had this huge, trade deficit with China, which he claimed was bad, and so he imposed these punitive tariffs, in my opinion, and then China retaliated, and now you got a war. You got a trade war, in my view. Challenge me if you'd like.
Well, that's close to the definition given in Investopedia, a website for advising investors. And it's curious, they said that a trade war happens when one country raises tariffs on another country's imports in response to increased tariffs from the first country. So under that sense, it's not the first country that started the war, it's the one that retaliates that starts the war. You don't have a war until somebody punches you back.
Right, okay, but the way I define it is the reason why you're punching in the first place. And in this case, Trump was punching not only because he's a fool, but because he also I was going to say he also thinks the trade wars can be easily won, but that goes back to my first comment. But he imposed them to punish China, basically, and also to reduce our trade deficit, which, to me, is a ridiculous thing to do. But you were going to say something, Lang?
Well, I'm not sure how much he believes in his own rhetoric. Where he's saying he's doing it for that, but then there's the domestic side of trying to cater to his base by saying, well, I promised I'd bring back jobs to America, so I'm going to go off and put tariffs on China to try to force companies to bring back the jobs that they put over there, and then I'm going to put tariffs against Canada and Mexico and European Union on steel and aluminum, because I said I would bring back steel jobs.
Right.
And then I'm going to threaten tariffs against Mexico because I said I would stop migrants from crossing the border. So I don't know how much of it is economic base. Clearly, the Mexico, he didn't even offer an economic basis for that threat.
Well, true, but, I totally agree. Well, he did say originally, or even during his campaign, that NAFTA was the worst trade deal he'd ever seen, and then negotiated an almost identical agreement, which still hasn't been ratified. But that goes back to my derogatory comment. But anyway, but he did make a big deal, whether it's sincere or not, over the trade deficit. And I wanted to address what a trade deficit is. I got to stop saying Hold me to that. A trade deficit is when, well, you might have said it best, Marissa. Would you like to share what you had said? I thought you had told me, you would give me an answer to that. It's when a country, come on.
Right, when a country spends more money in another country than that country is giving to them.
Yeah, okay, so we don't have an equal balance of trade in goods, and so one country has to pay cash for the others, and that's what we've been doing in America. With a lot of countries, we've been paying cash instead of trading in goods, mainly because our manufacturing left the country because they're cheaper elsewhere, you know.
Yeah, there's that notion as long as you're doing accounting based on national borders. And then there are so many corporations that are operating in all these different countries that how can you accurately attribute how much is based on one border and how much is on another? And you've got trades and services as well as goods. And you've got corporations like Apple, at headquarters in Ireland, when they have practically no business operations, and yet that's where most of their profits show up. So when you're calculating a trade deficit, how much is attributed to Ireland, and I mean,
Yes.
it's like slicing and dicing that they did with the mortgages. You can't trace anything back to concrete
Any one thing. Right.
facts.
And I want to be careful about getting into the weeds too far and stuff like this, but
Yeah, well, I'm just pointing out there's a lot of weeds here. And
yeah,
so
sure.
you can't
Well, like anything,
see clearly through it.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're dealing with humanity. Number one, we're dealing with global economy. So it's complex.
We're dealing with a lot of actors that are trying to hide what's really going on.
Correct, and so nothing is easy. Nothing is simple as a certain individual in the Oval Office seems to think they are. Okay.
Agreed.
Okay. Speaking of businesses, American businesses overseas, I have an article here from CNBC where they're saying something like 3/4 of American businessmen operating in China are saying they're being hurt by these tariffs, mainly because the Chinese government is starting to beat up on them. Hassling them, and bringing in inspectors more frequently, holding up permission to export, things like that. So, even our businesses in China are getting hurt by it, and of course, investors are withholding investment in China because there's things are so unstable because of us. But just thought I'd mention that. Anyhow, let me remind the listeners you're listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker with a guest, Marissa Mayer, here on A Pause for Thought. Give us a call. We're talking about President Trump's tariffs. 343-9927, 343-9927. If you'd like to call in with a question or to defend the president or anything else, 343-9927. Okay, Lang, so let's keep things close to home for right now. How are Trump's tariffs affecting Louisiana?
Well, the best source I found for that was an article by Mark Ballard in the Advocate last week, and he was commenting on the governor's race here and how all three of the major candidates at that time were not calling out Trump on his tariff policies because nobody wanted to offend Trump voters in
Right.
Louisiana. But in that article, he had a lot of economic data. I will trust his research. The first thing he pointed out was that in Louisiana, international shipping accounts for 39% of the state's gross domestic product, which means like
Almost
two
half.
out of every $5.
Yeah.
And that also is responsible for over 500,000 jobs in the state. And the state lost $7.1 billion worth of business from what's been happening,
And what was, do you have?
which is like 7% of the domestic product in the state, which comes out like $3,500 per person in the state.
Wow.
But then he has some other information about specific industries, and there are several. He shows strong impact. Louisiana exports to China fell by 61% in 2018.
Mostly soybeans,
last year.
probably, right?
Soybeans were a large part of it, but there's a lot more than that because it went. Well, yeah, I guess it was mostly soybeans. It was in 2017 there were $7.7 billion in soybeans. In 2018 that dropped to less than $1 billion.
Yeah.
So that's a huge drop. But the other impacts are the liquid natural gas shipped from Louisiana to China in 2018 was $389 million, and it's less than $50 million in the first half of this year. So if it continues at that rate, that's like we're down to 25% of what we were.
Yeah. And
last year.
We make that's our bread and butter is oil and gas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a major part of the state.
There's another part that's not the China tariffs so much as the steel and aluminum tariffs. That's caused the the price for the materials for construction of new industry to go up so much that they're cutting some of the proposed projects to be built in Louisiana are being canceled or postponed because it's gotten too expensive to construct them. Plus, there's the question of, well, if we construct these, where are we going to ship the stuff we're producing because the trade's being shut down?
Yeah, and Trump could change his mind next week and put new tariffs on new things. Who knows? But
and then another economic impact that was pointed out in the article was on the Port of New Orleans, which exports through that port dropped 14% between 2017 and 2018 because of the tariffs that reduced the exports from the U.S.
And, of course, all the jobs that go with all of that, too.
That's right.
The future jobs. And, of course, with local industries like ExxonMobil or somebody like that, any of these chemical plants here, they might delay new construction expansions on their plants because of the expensive, steel prices and all that. And, of course, I think we just had a steel plant close recently because people aren't buying steel,
Well, you could see a silver lining in this, that maybe this is Trump's hidden agenda to address global warming by shutting down or reducing the fossil fuel industries.
Yeah, I doubt.
Lang, this is my show. I make the jokes here, okay?
Okay.
That's it. That's my prerogative. Anyway, that's okay. Well, since now we're on... No, we're not. Actually, we're on the other things mostly besides soybeans. I would like to shift now to the impact of soybeans. Now, you already mentioned that soybean exports from Louisiana have almost been killed, haven't you?
Right, dropped from $7.7 billion to less than $1 billion.
Yeah, I'm looking at an article here. I didn't make note where it came from, but it said Louisiana farmers paying the price for trade war with China. And it said that, the price of our soybeans, because there's now a huge surplus because they're having a hard time selling them anywhere, has made them attractive, but they're not making any profit. The prices dropped below $9 a bushel, and the farmers need $10 a bushel just to break even. So our farmers here in Louisiana are getting hurt terribly. In fact, Point Capee Parish farmer George LaCour says the tariffs and China's retaliatory efforts have had a devastating effect on farmers and likely will continue to do so until the next presidential election in 2020. And, of course, he's apparently one farmer that won't be voting for Trump in the next elections. But there you go. But, the lower prices for soybean, and it's not just Louisiana's, it's the whole country's, also plays into the global shifts and other things. China has shifted much of its importing to Brazil, which has also been an exporter historically of soybeans, but now China has moved to them and is buying almost all of its soybean from them. And I don't know if you've got anything on that, but...
No, I don't, but I would wonder whether if this tariff war between the U.S. and China is resolved, whether China will come back to buy from the U.S. or whether it will rely on its established new purchasing arrangements with Brazil.
I'm thinking not, because they are investing in Brazil. Let me see if I can find the figure here. But they've invested... Oh, come on now.
So China's directly investing in Brazil for this production?
Yes, they're helping them. Here it is here. This is an article from DTN, which is it's an agricultural information, house or whatever. Specifically, COFCO, which is a Chinese company, will buy up to 25% more soybeans from Brazil over the next 5 years, while also financing the expansion of more than 60 million acres of soybean production in Brazil.
60 million acres. Is that coming out of Amazon?
Stay on topic.
Well, that is topic.
But, anyway, they're going to...
It would be a fallout consequence of this whole
Well, you're right.
strategy.
You're talking global warming and all that, and destroying. I agree totally. Well, yeah, you're right. It would be one more negative consequence of these foolish tariffs. But Marissa, you look like you're going to make a comment. I don't. Okay, no sweat. Just making sure. That's just the adult trainer in me. I try to look for people's body language and determine if they're wanting to ask a question or not. But and I have even made a note here with my red pen in this article that investing in $60 million, 60 million additional acres is a long-term thing. China's planning on being there a while.
Yeah.
And as I recall, I couldn't find it again, but I recall reading an article where China was also helping Brazil finance more soybean mills so they could crush more of it and produce more oil and feed, cattle feed and whatnot. So, they're going away from America, and it's not likely for them to come back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder on the long term there what's going to happen if Brazil has problem paying off those debts, because when we were doing the China New Road
Belt and Road
Initiative, it's like some of the consequences there, when you default on your debt, China comes in and takes over that facility that they constructed.
That's true, and Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, is called the Donald Trump of Brazil, actually, kind of like Duterte in the Philippines. So it's possible that he could wreck their economy, and then they would be in bad shape. One additional thing, though, that's rather sadly funny, if that's possible, with this soybean tariffs is that Brazil and Argentina are now buying up a lot of America's soybeans, but at the lower price because our farmers are desperate. And they're doing it because they had been growing their own soybeans and then exporting them to the rest of Latin America. But now they're selling their own soybeans to China for a premium and buying America's cheap stuff to sell to their domestic markets. So, that's something else. It just, then it's pathetic. It really is for everyone involved. But anyway, perhaps we should consider some other side effects. Any idea how these? Well, before we go on to the next phase, doesn't that make us sound organized, Lang? Of a pause for thought, I want to remind the listeners you're listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker with Marissa Mayer here on A Pause for Thought. Give us a call. We're talking about the tariffs, President Trump's tariff and trade war with China. 343-9927 is the number to call. 343-9927. Give us a shout. Ask us a question. Correct one of us. Make fun of me. I don't care. Just don't call me short. Anyway, 343-9927 is the number to call. So, Lang, what about any other effects of these trade wars? Are you aware of anything like that with Canada or Cuba or anybody like that?
Well, I'm not sure what the trade war with Cuba is. I know that there.
Well, the effects that might be showing up in Cuba or other countries as a result of Trump's trade war. I mean, like the economies in Brazil and Argentina have shifted because of the trade war. They're changing now the way they use soybeans or sell them, things like that. Have you seen any other things that would be detrimental to the U.S. elsewhere? And I'm just asking if you...
I didn't run across that in the research I've done.
Okay, well, I do have a couple things, as you might have expected, since I brought it up. And I will give you credit for giving me this idea way back when we were going to do a show like this, and then I couldn't. But there was a thing called the Helms-Burton Act, passed in 1996, and its actual name, it was sponsored by Helms, two guys named Helms and Burton, kind of like Bert and Ernie, huh? But it was actually called the Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity Act of 1996. And it dealt with trade, but it had a Title III section that allowed Cuban Americans who owned property in Cuba to sue anybody that traded in goods with Cuba, because it'd be trading in stolen goods. Okay, and obviously, apparently that Title III was put in there to satisfy the Cuban constituencies, but it had been bypassed, or what do they call it here? The word, it wasn't activated. It was ignored for the whole time the whole bill was in effect, until May of this year, when the Trump administration went ahead and enacted Title III. So now we can sue, and put fines on foreign nationals, anybody that trades in Cuban goods. And Canada responded to that. They passed their own bill. Let's see, this states here that is, as stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, amendments in 1996 to Canada's Foreign Extraterrestrial Measures Act stipulate that any judgment issued under the Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity Act of 1996 shall neither be recognized nor enforceable in any manner in Canada. So they're basically telling the Trump administration, do whatever you want, we're going to spit in your eye. And these are important allies, these are good allies. These are our friends, our neighbors, So, but that's one other consequence that that we're having, or that these trade wars are causing, and the trade policies of Trump are causing. But then there's our trade with Cuba, and this really isn't the tariffs though, but it's Trump stepping in and pulling back on our relationship.
It's a sanction, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think he reimposed sanctions on Cuba, or slowed down the rate of reducing them or whatnot. But as a result, China is stepping in to Cuba. I have an article here for the Center for Security Policy that states that the streets of Havana are increasingly populated by Chinese-made Yutong buses and Geely trucks. To the east of the capital, a Chinese company signed a deal last year to build a $500 million golf course. And Cuba is already using Chinese cash to fill in the gap left by Venezuela's disaster there. So, we're losing influence and trade to China in Cuba. Not to say nothing of the European Union. They've also upped their investments in Cuba as we pull back.
The EU has been investing in the tourism industry for quite a number of years, and there's a lot of European tourists that traveled to Cuba, and Cuban artists that have traveled to perform in Europe. They've had a reasonable, rational-based relationship with Cuba for many years.
Yeah.
I think part of what we're seeing is the decline of the capacity of the United States to dictate policy around the planet. It's like by trying to go it alone instead of working cooperatively, there's enough distributed power in countries around the world that they can cooperate without us.
Yeah, and even look at the Iran sanctions, Trump threatening penalties on our own allies if they trade with Iran, in the prohibited goods and oil especially. Mm-hmm. And the EU is still looking for ways to develop a way to trade openly with Iran and tell us to stick it.
To develop a separate channel that isn't part of this international finance network that the United States can force its will on to block transfers of funds.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's possible that they could get pushed so far that eventually they just say, go ahead and try it. Like Canada did. Just go ahead and try it. Try taxing our people. Try punishing us. I'd hate to see the consequences of that, but that's entirely possible. Now because Trump pulled out of that and is strangling the Iranian economy, we're seeing more attacks in the Middle East. We're seeing Iran acting up more, when it was initially Trump's policy or intention to, stop Iranian intervention over there.
Yeah, well, this push and pull has been going on since before Trump. I remember there were stories back, a decade or so ago, maybe more, about trying to come up with an alternative for the dollar for pricing oil. to open an oil exchange that wasn't based on the dollar, which would diminish the U.S. influence over the oil market globally.
Do you know who was this that was doing it?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, it's been a while since I was reading that stuff, but I think Saddam Hussein was behind trying to set up an alternative market for his oil that wouldn't be denominated in dollars, and that was by some sources or speculators or conspiracy theorists, whatever you want to call them, were saying that was one of the reasons that he was taken down, was for trying to set up this alternative to the dollar. But
yeah,
in any event, regardless of whether that was part of that action by the United States, there were attempts by countries to arrange for an alternative to the dollar for pricing oil.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the ideas the EU came up with, was to come up with a way to trade with Iran without using American dollars, and that would shut us out of trying to punish them. But we all know that the Iraq War was fought because Hussein wanted to kill W's daddy, right? Anyhow, or because they hate our freedom, but even though we can't go to Cuba or trade with them. I think that's it, Lang. I'm done with my comedy act, or rudimentary as it is. We got to go tonight, people. You've been listening to Wayne Parker, Marissa Mayer, and Lang Baker here on a Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. We got to go. You have a good night.